Hey everyone, I hope you're well. I've been reading through James chapter 3, verses 13 to 18 this week, and thinking about wisdom and humility. If you want to read those verses now, then pause the video and look them up. It's my birthday this week. I'm going to be 39. So I've had a reasonable amount of experience in my life. I've been a Christian for over 30 years. Plus, I work for the church, so I'm kind of a professional Christian. So when I started this study, I thought that God would teach me a few things, maybe some areas that would need some tweaking. But what I've learned is that He actually wants to change my life completely. If I'm going to actually listen to God and do what He says, I need to totally turn over control to Him and let Him rebuild my life. I need to have such a close relationship with Him that I walk with Him throughout my day and allow Him to guide me in every area. Reading through this book has really humbled me, and it's reinforced how much I need God's wisdom. So the verses say that there are two types of wisdom: God's wisdom, which produces humility and leads to caring for others, and a worldly wisdom, which in my Bible is in quotation marks, meaning that it's not really wisdom at all. This sort of wisdom is based on pride and putting self first, and it leads to disorder. I think it's important to remember that everything James is saying is to teach us to live together in church community. I need to remember this because I sometimes read the Bible as something disconnected from my life. I can read something and say, that's a great truth, but miss what God is saying about how I relate to people around me. Just like faith without deeds is dead, James makes it very clear that wisdom that we don't apply is useless. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life." So this means that God doesn't just give wisdom to us so we can have a trouble-free life. He blesses us so we can bless others. Anything that we learn is to be lived out in the way that we relate to others. So knowing this has changed the way that I read the Bible. Now when I read something, I expect God to give me a chance to practice it. And that normally happens in the very near future. If you've listened to any of the other videos, you'll know that I actually need a lot of practice. And knowing that keeps me humble. The second part of the verse says that any wisdom from God should result in deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. Humility is the key to knowing God. After all, we're not going to ask God for help if we think we already know all the answers. There's only one way to come before God, and that's humbly. We need to acknowledge that He's God and we're not. It makes no sense to come to God with conditions. We can only come to God with one question: what do you want me to do? But this verse also makes clear that knowing God and His wisdom leads to even more humility. I know this is true because the more I've tried to listen to God, the more I realize how much I still have to learn and how much I need His help. So to come to God, we have to humble ourselves, and knowing God keeps us humble. That's really good because I'm constantly tempted to do things my way. My son is 3 years old, and one of his favorite things to say is, "I do it." Even if he has no idea what he's doing, he wants to do it himself. And what I'm realizing is that I'm not really that different from him. I want to do things my way in my own strength. I even tried to read the Bible like that, thinking I've got it, when it would be better to slow down and listen and learn from the Father. The Bible is not a formula that I need to follow, but it's something that's designed to lead me into a relationship with God. It's in relationship with Him that we find wisdom. Trying to follow the Bible without a deep relationship with God just leads to frustration. You got to trust me on that. I've tried. It's worldly wisdom, and it comes from putting myself first. James gives us two examples of worldly wisdom. The first one is harboring bitter envy. So envy is basically wanting to be like someone else or have what they have. This is worldly wisdom because it stops us from seeing God's plan for us. God doesn't want us to be like someone else. It's in knowing Him that we find who we really are, who we were created to be. James has already said that our specific trials and weaknesses are good. Even they're good if they lead us to rely more on God. So we shouldn't try to be like someone else. And we shouldn't promote ourselves, as James says, having selfish ambition in our hearts. We are designed to be part of God's family, which is a community where people love their neighbor as themselves. If we're envious, we're not loving ourselves. And if we're selfish, we're not loving our neighbor. And both of these things lead to a messed up family. So what do we do about it? Well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to seek God's wisdom. I'm going to seek a deeper relationship with Him and trust that He'll take my mixed up ideas and replace them with wisdom, which is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. So recently I've had a couple of conversations with people about the speed that we're going through the book of James. One person was surprised how many videos we could make about such a small book. And another person said they're still wrestling with things they've learned in chapter 1. So what I would say is go at the pace that God leads you. Personally, I try not to move on from something until I understand and or I do it. So with the way we're doing these videos, I've actually been going a bit quicker than I would normally read the Bible myself. But you don't need to. It takes time for the kind of deep work that God wants to do in us. So don't be rushed. It's not about watching all the videos or reading a lot of the Bible. It's about listening to God and doing what He says. So move at the pace that He's leading you. Next week, we will slow it down a bit again and look at chapter 4, verses 1 to 3, which say, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. As usual, we'll be asking the questions, what's the truth in these verses? Am I living by this truth? What would my life look like if I always lived by this truth? And what do I need to do?